Wilt Chamberlain had so many ridiculous games that this one somehow gets overshadowed. But on March 18th, 1968 against the Lakers, he produced one of the most absurd stat lines the league has ever seen. Wilt did not just dominate the game, he practically consumed it. He finished with 53 points, 32 rebounds, and 14 assists while playing all 48 minutes without a single second of rest. That stat line already sounds fake. Then the efficiency makes it even harder to process. Wilt shot 24 for 29 from the field, which is 82.8%, while still carrying the offense from every direction. Philadelphia scored 158 points, and Wilt either scored or directly created more than half of them. The rebounding part is just as ridiculous. The Lakers grabbed 48 rebounds as a team. Wilt had 32 by himself. If blocks and steals had been officially tracked back then, this game might have crossed into territory the sport still has never seen again. Even without those numbers, this box score reads less like a normal NBA game and more like a glitch. If Wilt represents the era where impossible numbers feel almost mythical, Kobe Bryant is what happens when that same absurdity appears in the modern NBA right in front of cameras, analysts, and full defensive schemes. On January 22, 2006 against the Toronto Raptors, Kobe scored 81 points in 42 minutes, the second highest scoring total in league history. But the terrifying part was not just the total. It was the way it unfolded. The Lakers were down by 18 in the third quarter. Then Kobe practically detonated the game by himself. He had 26 in the first half, then dropped 55 in the second half alone. He scored 27 in the third quarter and 28 in the fourth. This was not a slow accumulation. It was an escalation that kept getting worse for Toronto until the game turned into survival and then collapse. Kobe shot 60.9% from the field, 53.8% from three, and 90% from the line. He scored 81 of the Lakers' 122 points. That means one player became almost the entire offense, and the Raptors still had no answer. After an 81-point game, it should be hard to find something that feels even stranger. Luka Doncic did it by changing the shape of absurdity completely. On December 27th, 2022 against the New York Knicks, Luka produced a stat line that had never existed in NBA history: 60 points, 21 rebounds, and 10 assists. Nobody had ever reached that combination before him. What makes this game so bizarre is not just the 60 points, it is the 21 rebounds attached to it. That is the kind of rebounding number you expect from a dominant center living at the rim, not from a lead ball handler running the entire offense. Luka shot 21 for 31 from the field, nearly 68%. For a 60-point game, that level of efficiency borders on unreasonable. Dallas was also trailing late, so this was not empty scoring and a comfortable win. It was a full rescue mission. He closed the game in overtime, broke the Mavericks franchise scoring record, and turned a triple-double into something far more ridiculous. If Luka bent the logic of what a lead guard can do, Nikola Jokic pushed that idea even further by doing it from the center position. On March 7, 2025 against the Phoenix Suns, Jokic finished with 31 points, 21 rebounds, and 22 assists. The numbers sound wrong the second you hear them because 22 assists from a center already feels almost impossible. Jokic added 31 points and 21 rebounds on top of that. It was the first 30-20-20 game in more than 75 years of NBA history. Denver won 149-141 in overtime, and Jokic was essentially running the entire game. He directly touched more than 60% of the Nuggets' made baskets. In overtime, almost everything flowed through him. That is what makes this stat line so absurd. It does not just break a record, it erases the normal boundaries between center point guard and offensive engine. The game stopped looking positional and started looking like one player controlling every layer of offense at once. Some records feel difficult to break. Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game exists on a completely different level. On March 2, 1962, Wilt scored exactly 100 points against the New York Knicks. More than 60 years later, the gap between that performance and the rest of scoring history still looks almost impossible to close. The Philadelphia Warriors scored 169 points, and Wilt had 100 of them by himself, nearly 59% of the entire team total. He shot 36 for 63 from the field and added 28 made free throws on 32 attempts. The context makes it even more frightening. There was no three-point line in 1962. Every point came from inside the arc or from the foul line. There were no modern shortcuts to inflate the number. The game also carries a mythic quality because it was never fully televised. No complete footage exists, only the box score, the famous post-game photo, and a stretch of fourth-quarter radio audio. One of the greatest performances in sports history survives almost like a real legend. After Wilt's 100-point game, the next kind of absurdity had to look different. That is where Klay Thompson comes in. On October 29, 2018, against the Chicago Bulls, Klay scored 52 points in just 27 minutes and set the NBA record with 14 made threes. What separates this from a normal scoring explosion is the speed. He did not even need the fourth quarter. Most players need a full game to reach 50. Klay got there before the game even became tense. He hit 14 of his 24 attempts from deep, and 24 of his 29 total shots came from beyond the arc. The entire night basically turned into a test of how long Chicago could chase him before everything broke apart. By the middle of the third quarter, the record was gone. Klay did not need isolation dribbles, playmaking tricks, or extra time. He just needed a short stretch of heat to turn an NBA game into something that looked more like an open shooting drill. If you like absurd box scores like these, subscribe and stay close. Now for a stat line that looked mistyped. Some players do not need huge scoring totals to control a game. Draymond Green pushed that idea to a level that barely makes sense. On February 10, 2017, against the Memphis Grizzlies, he finished with 4 points, 12 rebounds, 10 assists, and 10 steals. Yes, a triple-double with only 4 points. It remains the strangest triple-double in NBA history, because the category players usually reach first is scoring, not steals. Draymond flipped that logic completely. 10 steals means 10 possessions taken directly away from the opponent. Add 5 blocks on top of that, and he personally destroyed 15 Memphis offensive actions. Then there were the 10 assists, which created at least 20 more points for Golden State. The Warriors won 122-107, and Draymond controlled the entire game while barely functioning as a scorer. He took only 6 shots and made 2 of them. It did not matter at all. This was a triple-double built from chaos defense and pure basketball intelligence. If Draymond showed how a player could control a game without much scoring, Dennis Rodman pushed that idea even further. On December 1, 1993, Rodman finished with 28 rebounds and exactly 0 points. Not 4, not 2, but a clean 0. The Spurs won 92-88, and Rodman almost single-handedly shaped the game by owning the glass. 10 of those 28 rebounds were offensive boards, which means San Antonio got 10 extra possessions directly because of him. What makes this stat line so strange is not just that a player can have that much impact without scoring. It is that Rodman did this more than once. He owns the highest rebound totals in NBA history for games with 0 points. Most players cannot reach 28 rebounds, even while trying to score. Rodman did it in a close game with no interest in the box score column people usually care about, and still ended up being one of the most important players on the floor. After chaos-heavy stat lines like Draymond and Rodman, Chris Paul delivered a completely different kind of absurdity. On December 10, 2016, he finished with 20 points, 20 assists, and 0 turnovers. It sounds quieter than a 70-point explosion, but in its own way, it might be even more impossible. A point guard touches the ball constantly, reads dozens of changing situations, and makes high-speed decisions on nearly every possession. To create 20 assists without giving the ball away a single time almost goes against the natural risk of basketball itself. Those 20 assists directly generated at least 40 points. Add his own 20, and Paul was responsible for a minimum of 60 points for the Clippers. Los Angeles won 133-105, and the entire game felt like a live demonstration of total control. No wasted dribbles, no reckless passes, no empty possessions. Some stat lines become absurd because they are chaotic. This one became absurd because it was almost unnaturally clean. If Chris Paul represented perfect control, Scott Skiles represented passing volume pushed to an almost absurd extreme. On December 30, 1990, Skiles handed out 30 assists against the Denver Nuggets. That is still the NBA record today. 30 assists in a single game sounds more like a video game stat than something that should happen in a real NBA arena. Orlando won 155-116, and Skiles was basically the mind behind the entire game. He also scored 22 points, but those barely matter compared to the passing total. The frightening part is how he did it. This was not one of those nights where a point guard feeds one unstoppable scorer over and over. Skiles kept finding different teammates in different spots, and 8 Orlando players finished in double figures. That means he was not forcing the offense into one lane. He He was turning the entire roster into a live scoring network. And with only 4 turnovers, the performance was not just huge, it was unbelievably controlled. After Scott Skiles and the madness of 30 assists, the next step has to be a different kind of total control. That is where Hakeem Olajuwon enters. On March 29, 1990, against the Milwaukee Bucks, Hakeem finished with 18 points, 16 rebounds, 10 assists, and 11 blocks. That is a quadruple-double, one of the rarest stat lines in NBA history. What makes this game so special is that the scoring total is almost beside the point. The absurdity comes from the range of impact. Hakeem was creating offense like a playmaker, cleaning the glass like an elite rebounding machine, and erasing shots at the rim like a one-man defensive system. 11 blocks means at least 11 possessions where Milwaukee reached the basket and got nothing. 10 assists from a center adds another layer that should not really fit the same player profile. This was not just a huge box score. It was a full game takeover on both ends without needing 40 or 50 points to make the performance feel historic. To close the list, it makes sense to end on a stat line that feels wrong before you even get to the numbers. Magic Johnson was a rookie point guard, but in Game 6 of the 1980 NBA Finals with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar injured and unavailable, Magic stepped into the biggest game of the season as an emergency center. Then he finished with 42 points, 15 rebounds, 7 assists, 3 steals, and 1 block. The Lakers won the title on the road in Philadelphia, and Magic took Finals MVP at just 20 years old. What makes this performance absurd is not only the box score, it is the setting around it. A rookie point guard was suddenly asked to absorb front-court responsibilities in a championship closeout game, and instead of merely surviving, he led the team in scoring and rebounding. He did not just patch a hole, he turned a crisis into one of the most iconic performances in league history. Some stat lines become legendary because of the numbers. This one became legendary because the context was just as unbelievable. That is what makes NBA history so strange. Some nights the box score stops being a stat sheet and starts looking like a legend.